I will take the ring to Lemuria, though I do not know the way. No problem, lad. We'll be home in time for dinner. But how? You fool of a took. We're surrounded by bloody birds. Hello and welcome to another Dominion 6 National Overview. In this one we'll be going over Late Age Piconye, the legacy of the Prester King. One of the successor nations of Ind, the Horned Men of Piconye seek to carry on their legacy. No longer turning their perfection only inward, they wish to show all nations of the world the depth of their virtue. The nation of Piconye is made up of the Piconye people, little horned men who are similar in stature to Hobergs, who prefer Heat 1 scales. They are the bulk of the army, with some additional knights on warbirds as well as some more sacred troops. In terms of magic, they have some access to astral and earth magic, with some additional paths in fire, nature, and water. They have powerful priests, able to recruit holy threes in their capital, and most of their commanders are priests as well. Every temple they build will allow them to recruit one additional sacred, which is nice for their sacred troops. For the Dominion, they have an order limit of +1, and they get one free bless point. They build standard forts of the Late Age, and they also have a discount on their temples. Moving on to the Piconye themselves, they're a size 2 race, so I'm obviously predisposed into liking them. Each of them are gluttonous, so they consume as much supplies as a human, which can be an issue given how many units you can recruit. They're all fairly slow movers, both in and out of combat, so moving them around can be an issue. The only exception to this is their bird knights, but more on them later. They have less hit points and strength than a human, but they do have better defense skill and higher magic resistance to make up for that slightly. They also do not have the best base morale as a whole, though they do have ways to work around that. Moving on to your troops, you have some militia-style recruits to use in desperate situations, as well as some fairly typical infantry and crossbows for the Late Age. Instead of horses, your people use warbirds in combat, which does open up some tactical flexibility. As with all small nations, you have really good attack density, as you can fit 5 of your guys in a square for 5 attacks per square. This also makes your troops able to take buffs well, due to the AoE affecting more units per cast. With your higher magic resistance, your troops are actually better at shrugging off spells that use magic resistance negates, but with their lower hit points they can be easily killed by large amounts of AoE damage. Let's start off with the Piconye Militia, a fairly standard militia type unit. They don't have great armour and they're armed with a pitchfork, for which they have pretty bad attack skill and their morale is also terrible as well. In comparison to most militia, they actually survive okay in close combat just due to the defense skill of 12, but they will die in droves against missile fire or magic just due to the lack of a shield, low protection, and hit points. Still, they can be useful to get out in a pinch if you just need bodies to hold the line. The Piconye Slinger is a fairly cheap slinger that has decent-ish stats and surprisingly good protection on their head thanks to their iron caps. You can recruit a lot of these guys very quickly in order to drown your enemies in rocky firepower, which is one of their main benefits, especially if they're given buffs. They are, however, rather lacking. Their strength is low, so their sling doesn't do much damage, and they will struggle to deal with your average late-age troops' protection. They don't have very good morale, and with their chest piece they'll probably also lose in archer duels, where they will also have a range disadvantage. They are fairly quick to mass though, so if you desperately need more ranged firepower, then these guys are okay as long as you can give them things like strength buffs or something like flaming arrows. On to a more serious ranged threat, the Piconye Crossbowmen are more suited to the Late Age. They do cost a little bit more in resources than the Slinger, but for that you get a fairly heavily armoured troop armed with a crossbow, which gives them good range and decent precision, and still does 10 armour piercing pierce damage on top of that. Their low strength doesn't impact the crossbow's damage that much, and given their cost you can get a lot of these guys fairly easily. Just not quite as many as the Slingers, making them a very effective ranged firepower choice for you to use, just due to the number of bolts flying towards your enemies. Give them some more buffs, and just due to the number of them, they can be quite scary to face for most late age armies. At least until Air Shield starts to come out. The Piconye Spearman is a basic line-holding infantry. They have decent protection, and a shield with a spear that does low damage, but it does give them a length 3 weapon for repelling, on top of their good defense skill of 15. This makes these spearmen quite good as line holders. They'll last longer than you maybe give them credit for, and due to the harassment penalty coming out from a square of these guys, they can actually deal with regular infantry pretty well, but they're far from your killiest unit. Use them to hold the line for your other units to dish out the damage. The Piconye Soldier is a slightly more offensively orientated frontline, with better defense and attack skill in comparison to the spearmen, but with a lower ability to repel. They'll hit more often with their short swords, which do a little more damage, and at defense skill 17, they can defend themselves pretty well against most regular troops. They are also slightly braver, which is nice. If you can get something like a strength buff or an attack skill buff on these guys, they actually become pretty scary against normal troops. But, like most of their brethren, they will die if they take a hit, unfortunately, most of the time, and they may have some issues actually closing with the enemy with their combat speed. The Piconye Defender is a juggernaut in terms of defense. They have really good protection with a large tower shield against arrows, and they have good magic resistance and 19 defense skill. These guys are made to weather the storm on the front line while your other units do the damage. Well, if they can get there. They have a combat speed of 2, making these guys exceptionally slow. They'll hold a line, but the enemy may just walk around them. They make great bodyguards until the target they're guarding moves, and then they'll start to fall behind. Use them instead as a brick wall against your opponents when you have the gold and resources to spare to recruit them. In combat, they actually have a higher strength and hit points than your other basic units, but the trade-off for this is they have very high encumbrance of 10, so they will tire themselves out quickly when they get into combat, though they may recover their fatigue after one fight by how long it takes them to get to the next one. The Bird Knight is your fast attack unit, with decent protection and stats and a great defensive skill of 20 on the rider. They're flying, so they have good map move and the ability to flank your opponent's archers or backlines by flying past the front line. The rider is pretty good in combat, but he is let down somewhat by the Warbird who has no protection and not the best stats, but you can get 3 of them in a square, which is a lot of attacks on the first turn of combat with their lance and their dive attack. Scary on the flying charge, but if they don't kill their target immediately, you will begin to take some losses. Still, they're very useful for expansion and in your first couple of wars due to their maneuverability and high initial damage output. Moving on to your capital-only sacreds, first of all we have the Crosswielder, a sacred crossbowman with slightly better stats that can also take a bless. This can make some weapon blesses interesting, my personal favourite being Frost Mist weapons to shower your enemies in cold clouds. Sadly, they are capital only, but you can recruit 1 a turn for each temple you have in addition. A decent addition to your ranged firepower, but only if you have a bless to make use of them. The Soldier Priest is a souped up version of your swordsman, with good skills and protection that does decent work with a sword. If you have a bless to improve their damage, then these guys can go to town, especially with the inclusion of something like Blood Surge or Righteous Wrath in order to improve their damage output. They will struggle to reach the enemy quickly though, and they can still be killed by enemy crossbows, so be careful with how you disperse them into your army and what orders you give them. The Baculite is another interesting sacred option for you. They have decent stats and equipment, though they don't have a shield. They're one of your stronger units and they do decent damage with their Baculus, which has an inbuilt magical attack and also causes enemy sacreds to suffer fatigue damage in an AoE of 1, which is pretty deadly when you have a full square or more of these guys hitting enemy sacreds. The enemy sacreds will rapidly fall asleep under the fatigue damage barrage, where they'll then be far easier to take out. The main weakness of these guys is they don't have a shield, which in combination with their HP means they're more likely to be killed by any kind of crossbow fire that manages to get past their protection, without some kind of defensive buff through spells or a bless. Still, they're probably one of your best anti-sacred units that you can recruit. So what can we take away from your troops? Well, you have size 2s for really good buffing potential, but you have the issue that your troops are slow in combat and on the map, moving only 1 province a turn, which can cause issues strategically if caught out of position. Additionally, it makes them more susceptible to flanking attacks, as they may just get around your lines as you have to fit 5 of your guys in a square rather than your opponent's 3. So, depending on how deep your lines are, the enemy might just walk past you. The only one that doesn't have the problem with combat speed or map movement is your Bird Knights, making them a very tempting choice for strike forces. You also have the issue of encumbrance, and that many of your units have high encumbrance. They'll tire themselves out quickly in combat. But you do have access to fairly cheap crossbow holders, which is very effective in the early to mid part of the Late Age. Your sacreds are good, but capital only. Which one is best for you will be very reliant on what bless you have, but the Baculites will always be useful against enemy sacreds. The main issue you will have is actually catching the enemy army with sacreds on the map. So, let's move on to your commanders. You have good access to Holy 3s through your capital, as well as plentiful amounts of Holy 1s and Holy 2s. In addition, you have decent astral and earth access, with some additional access to nature, fire and water through randoms. You have access to good leaders for most of your troops, with high leadership and additional inspirational features on most of your leaders. Starting off with your basic commanders, you have access to the Piconye Scout, a flying scout who is decently stealthy with good map move, but they do cost slightly more than an independent scout. They make a very good choice for use as gem farriers due to their map movement, though you will probably end up using more indie scouts for actual scouting due to their cost, and also not requiring a fort to make. Still though, a stealthy flying unit is always a useful one to have, and their stats aren't the worst either. The Bird Knight Commander is a good leader at a fair cost. They have good skills, and especially in their defense at 21, with decent protection and attack. These are the no-brainer leaders for your Bird Knights. They have the map move to use them to the fullest. These squads of flying knights will be some of your only ones able to move more than one province a turn, making them very important for any kind of fluid defense. The commander does also make an effective raider with some knights to assist him, as they can do a lot of damage to lightly defended provinces. As with the knights, the only thing that lets them down are their warbirds themselves, for while the birds have a decent defense skill and okay hit points, they have no protection, so for any kind of sturdy target they'll need accompanying mages for defense and potentially strength buffs as well. The Piconye Bishop is your first mage, who's an okay leader with an inspirational +1, has Holy 1 for paths. They're also an Inquisitor, making them able to effectively combat enemy dominion, especially if they're in a province with a temple. Their main purpose is to help bless your sacreds in combat, as well as performing some banishments against undead foes. They are also fairly cheap for being an Inquisitor. Otherwise, you do have better options for recruitment if you can afford them. They have a decent defense skill, but no other equipment other than the dagger they start with, so try and keep them out from danger if you can. The Piconye Bishop General is similar to the Bishop, but without the Inquisitor feature, but is a better leader. This makes them decent leaders, especially for small groups of sacreds that need a bless on top of other troops that need formations, though they have less utility outside of combat as they're only holy ones. They have decent enough stats though. With good defense skill, they're just slightly let down by their HP. If you can hide them in squads of acolytes, with some basic gear they can actually become pretty effective anti-sacred thugs. The Piconye Archbishop is a Holy 2 mage who's a good leader, both inspirational and an Inquisitor. These guys are useful for being able to cast Sermon of Courage on your regular troops in order to help with their morale, as well as being able to smite demons, and they have a better banishment spell. They're not much more expensive than your Bishop Generals, and also have a Bacillus, which makes them surprisingly okay against sacreds out of the bat with their defense skill. Their lack of protection, however, leaves them quite vulnerable if their defense skill fails. Get if you need to get rid of enemy dominion quickly, or if you know you're against forces of undead or demons. The downside to them versus the other bishops is that they cost 2 commander points each rather than 1, so it's up to you if you prefer quality over quantity. The Piconye Sage is an Earth 1 mage with an 100% chance for +1 in fire, water, astral or nature. They are adept researchers, making them pretty fast researchers for their immediate cost. They aren't sacred, unlike many of your other mages, so having too many will start to eat into your income. They also don't have the best paths for combat, with the exception of your astral mages, who can be useful for joining communions. Their cross paths do give them a decent amount of forging and summoning options, however. Their best use is dedicated researchers, just because of their upkeep cost. The Piconye Sage Priest is a Fire, Earth, Astral and Holy 1 Sacred Mage with an 100% chance for +1 in Fire, Water, Earth, Astral or Nature. These are the workhorses of your nation. They have a not inconsiderable price tag at 260 gold, but they're sacred for lower upkeep and give you Astral, Fire and Earth access, and they can bless themselves or troops they accompany. The fact that they have Astral should be what grabs your attention. With any of their randoms, it means you can path climb them using communions, which in conjunction with spells like Power of the Spheres and maybe the occasional booster, can give you access to pretty much any big battlefield buff. Outside of combat, their paths are a little more limited, but the Earth randoms can make Earth boots, the Astral randoms can use those boots for coins of meteoric iron, making them an effective way of climbing up Astral for more independent casters. Best of all, these guys are farm recruitable. They don't require a fort to be recruited, making you able to pump out a lot of them if you have a good economy behind you to set up the infrastructure needed. They have good magic resistance and defense, but otherwise their stats are a bit lacking, and at Astral 1 base they are very vulnerable to magic duels in the battlefield, something to watch out for. Moving on to your capital-only commanders. Both of these are your recruitable Holy 3s, great for divine blessing your many sacred commanders and troops, for smiting, and for claiming thrones, giving you some extra utility for when it comes to winning the game. They are, however, both old-aged, so you will have to keep that in mind. First we have the Piconye Pope, a Holy 3 sacred mage who's a good leader with inspirational and is also an Inquisitor. Holy 3 and Inquisitor makes them exceptional at removing enemy dominion, no matter how strong it is in a province, as well as giving you access to good battlefield-wide buffs through divine blesses. Recruit them if you need to take thrones or have them accompany armies with multiple squads of sacreds. Also, don't underestimate their banishment power, and especially don't underestimate their smites. if you choose one of these guys to be your prophets, this does actually give you access to Holy 4s as well, for things like fanaticism. The Prester King is a slow to recruit Holy 3, Astral 2 and Earth 1 Sacred Mage, with a 100% chance for +1 in Fire, Water, Earth, Astral or Nature, and then a second 10% chance for +1 in these same paths. These guys are your best recruitable Astral, and with boosters can get up pretty far, even more so with an Astral random. You have a very small chance of getting Nature 2 with these guys as well, though you do rely on 2 randoms. If you're lucky enough to get one of them, then you can get up higher in Nature thanks to using Thistle Maces and then also making Moonvine Bracelets, which will help your other Nature casters. They don't make as good leaders as some of your other choices, only able to lead 50 men without advanced formations, but they do have a lot of inspirational to help with morale issues, useful for squads of men that you don't care about the formations with. Given that they are slow to recruit, and also their cost, you probably don't want to have too many of these guys, but they are useful to support your communions with their cross paths and higher astral magic though. So what can we take away from your mages? Well, you have lots of access to holy levels, 1 through 3. This lets you easily bless troops, take thrones with your 3s, and have access to a lot of banishment to help with undead nations or undead summoners. You have a lot of good leaders with inspirational to help out with your morale issues, and also good paths for forging items in order to improve their leadership as well. Your overall magical path access is pretty low, with your maximum being 2 from your capital only Prester Kings, unless you want to rely on randoms. But quite a few have innate astral access. Communions will massively improve your mage's ability to affect the battlefield, which is useful as your best numerous mage, the Sage Priest, is also farm recruitable. Use these communions for big buffing and battlefield-wide spells in order to aid yourself in battle. Moving on to your national summons, starting with the regular ones and then moving on to your angelic supporters. The Buffalo are berserking, trampling animals. You get access to them at Conjuration 3 in a ritual that requires Nature 2 and 8 Nature Gems. The Buffaloes are very useful for their high HP and size, as well as the fact they can do very good damage with their hoof and gore, on top of having high strength to help you in sieges. Their main downsides are their poor protection and the paths required to summon them. You will struggle to get Nature 2 outside very lucky randoms on the nation, unless you have a way to make yourself a Thistle Mace. As such, they're nice to have, but hard to get. Still, very useful for evocation bait and as tramplers when you can get them. The Great Lion is an undisciplined animal with half dark vision. They require Conjuration 3 with a Nature 2 ritual for 9 Nature Gems that summons 15 or more of them with extra levels. They do decent damage with their multi-attack, but they have not great protection or magic resistance. Again, like the Buffalo, they're hard to get without indie mages, randoms, or boosters for your nature paths. Still, if you can summon them, they can do some good work. The main issue is the fact they're undisciplined, and they're a little bit overshadowed by our next summon. The Tiger is very similar to the Lion, but with higher HP, strength, and attack skill for the same cost. They require Conjuration 3 with 2 nature levels and 9 nature gems for 15 or more tigers with extra paths. They cost the same, and they're just better than Lions. If you had to choose between the two, go with tigers almost 100% of the time. Again, you have issues in who's going to summon them, but they hit hard with 2 attacks, and they have very high combat speed. Plus, they're cool, because, hey, tigers. The Elephant is a larger version of the Buffalo, effectively serving in the same niche. They need Conjuration 3 and 2 nature levels to cast, and the ritual itself costs 20 nature gems for 5, plus 1 for every additional 2 levels in natures, which is quite an investment. For it, however, you get a size 9 trampler with decent natural protection, but poor morale, though your inspirational leaders can help with that. Again, their main issue is that you will struggle to summon these without randoms or boosters, making them quite gem inefficient, especially in the late age. Still, with some buffs to help them, they can be quite hard to take down on the battlefield. Just make sure they don't rout into your own lines. The Cyclops are size 6 undisciplined troops that require Conjuration 3 and Earth level 2 in order to summon. They cost 9 Earth Gems for 5 Cyclops plus 1 for every 2 extra levels. These paths are easier for you to get to, making them a much more attractive proposition. They have a lot of HP and they hit very hard with their Grey Club, and they have good strength, making them quite handy for sieges. They are undisciplined sadly, so they will struggle to receive buffs, but their main role should be as siege crackers in my mind, as well as for use as hard hitters to help with other squads of Bacillus, or if you just want to intersperse with your own troops, you can fit one of these guys and 2 of your little Piconies as well. Moving on to your angels. The first is the Malk, who requires Conjuration 4 and Astral level 2 for one of them, costing 9 Astral Pearls. For this, you get a Holy One, Sacred, Flying, Magical Being that's also stealthy. They have 15 invulnerability, 4 awe, and a little bit of fire and shock resistance. Between the awe and the invulnerability, she's actually surprisingly tanky, especially if you have a bless to help her out, though her skills leave a little to be desired. She is summoned without gear, but you could kit her out to do some basic light thugging, especially given the fact that she can fly. The fact she is also stealthy is great, allowing her to become an effective raiding force for you without too much investment in terms of gems. Just be careful, as she hasn't got much better than human HP to deal with hard hitters. The Hashmal is an angel surrounded by holy fire. They require Conjuration 6, and Astral 3, and Fire 1 to summon one of them, costing 21 Astral Pearls. Again, they come without gear, though this is less of an issue as they have decent skills and stats, on top of Invulnerability 20, Awe 5, and a Fire Shield of 10, while still being able to fly, being an Inquisitor, and also ethereal, and having Holy Level 2, making them able to bless themselves and cast Holy Avenger to aid them against those that would face them. Between the Awe, Invulnerability, and Ethereal, those without magic weapons will really struggle to hit them, making them great raiders and light thugs even without gear. Their Flame Strike also has an AoE of 1, and it does do decent damage on top of that, making them effective chaff clearers, especially on top of their Flame Shield. They have good magic resistance, but do beware of cold evocations that they have no resistance to, as well as any enemies that are using magical weapons. You can gear a Hashmal up to make their skills and stats better, but they do still work fairly well out of the gate, though unlike the Malak, they do not have stealth to help them with their raiding, and they only have slots to use in their hands and their 2 miscellaneous slots. The next angel we have on the list is the Errol, who can be summoned at Conjuration 7 with Astral 4 and Nature 1 for 39 Astral Pearls. For this, you get a Holy and Nature 3 Sacred Mage, who is a good leader, who has Invulnerability 15, Awe 6, Healer 3, and some good poison resistance. While not quite as good in combat as some of your earlier summons out of the box, you cannot underestimate the power of Awe 6, especially when combined with her already high magic resistance. The main issue with her is her low attack skill base, meaning that she'll require quite a bit of magical gear in order to become a major thug. The best thing about her, however, is her nature paths. With a Thistle Mace and some gems, she can fly around to every major conflict you're going to have, casting big battlefield-wide spells like Relief or Howl in order to help your forces. This is in addition to having a high map move Holy 3, letting you take thrones as quickly as you conquer them. Unlike your other 2 angels as well, she only has 10 morale, so she may run away if placed near fear effects. The Oafen requires Conjuration 8, 5 Astral and 2 Fire, and 49 Astral Pearls for a fairly powerful summon. They're size 7 tramplers, though they do reduced damage as they're ethereal, but they can still fly. They have Awe 6 and 11 Fire Shield on top of being Holy 3. They have a more damaging flame attack similar to the Hashmal that hits in an AoE of 1, making them excellent at clearing out chaff without magical weapons thanks to their etherealness, and on top of their high protection. Additionally, they have high map move, HP and magic resistance, making them quite hard to take down. Additionally, they have Holy Level 3, letting you use them to take thrones, and with their stats they could put up a good fight against concentrated defences. They have a massive patrol bonus as well thanks to their many eyes. A later in the game, but still very effective summon to use as raiders and heavy thugs. Finally, we have the Cho'Gath, a multiple form angel summoned with the Call of the Merkava spell at Conjuration 9 that requires Astral 7 and Fire 3 and a whopping 222 Astral Pearls. For this, however, you get a very strong summon. They have Holy 4 and Level 4 in either Astral, Earth, Air or Fire, depending on their form, on top of 30 invulnerability, 7 Awe, and a massive 17 Fire Shield, and good resistances to everything bar cold. On top of the Awe and Fire Shield, they also have a form of Sight Vengeance, causing those that attack them to go blind. They're so powerful that you can't even wish for them, and they spread your dominion by their very presence. They make great throne takers, or, if you don't want to risk them too much, great leaders for your armies too, with a +3 squad morale bonus inbuilt. The trade-off with them is obviously the high path requirement to summon them, the fact they're Conjuration 9, and they cost so many gems in order to summon. They're a very, 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 very late into the game summon. Additionally, they don't have any form of armor or weapons built in, so you'll probably want to make them some, increasing the gem investment as well. When the Cho'Gath is harmed, it will transform into its next form, from its astral to its air to its fire to its earth form. If the earth form of the Cho'Gath is killed, then it will die, though the earth form is also the tankiest one of the 4 and has the highest HP. The forms differ slightly, but they basically have the same stats as each other. In addition, when a Cho'Gath enters the battlefield, it will bring with them 4 Offens, the previous angel we talked about, as a retinue, guaranteed for any battle they are in. This includes assassinations. If you can afford the level 9 research and a hefty 222 pearls, every battle they are in is equal to summoning 4 offens, which would cost 196 pearls just by itself. A fairly decent investment. Moving on to your national sites, your first is the Sublime Palace, which lets you recruit your Prester Kings and gives you 1 Astral Pearl and 1 Earth Gem per turn. Whereas the Cerulean Cathedral gives you access to Piconye Pope, the Crosswielder, Soldier Priest and Bakelite, as well as 1 Pearl and 1 Fire Gem per turn. A 4 gem income in the late game isn't bad, especially when 2 of them are in Astral Pearls. So in terms of magical research, what's important to you as Piconye? Well, that immediate level in Thaumaturgy is very useful for your communions. Beyond that, you're more than a little free to choose what you like. Conjuration is important not just for summoning larger units that can act as HP sponges for your little dudes, but also gives you access to spells such as Summon Earth or Phoenix Power, Power the Spheres and Light of the Northern Star to boost up your lower path mages on the battlefield, greatly helping your communions. Evocation is another good path, giving you good fire, earth and astral spells to directly harm your foes, especially when you use them in conjunction with your communions in order to cast spells continuously throughout a battle. Alteration will let you buff up your troops' natural protection, give them things like Twist Fate or Body Ethereal, which will massively help them in keeping them alive. Anything that lets them not take HP damage is massive for your numerous troops, whose small size and low combat speed also helps you massively in terms of buffing them. Enchantment is useful for strength buffs, things like anti-magic and relief for your troops, and construction will let you create boosters for rituals that you cannot use your conjuration magic in order to get the pass for. So what are some example spells you could go for? Well, the first I've mentioned are your boosters in conjuration: Earth and Phoenix Power, Power of the Spheres, and Light of the Northern Stars. These are great to cast for your communions. They will let your slaves take lower casting fatigue due to having less chance of having less than half of the master's paths, and they also help boost the masters up in order to be able to cast high impact and high path spells. Power of the Spheres is especially useful because it buffs up all the paths the caster and any connected communion slaves have, especially useful if you want to boost up for certain cross paths like, say, Strength of Gaia on your nature randoms. Next up are all the skin spells, though you have easier access to earth magic, so they'll more than likely be the stone or iron skin spells. Anything that increases your troops' natural protection makes them harder to damage, and given your troops lower than human hit points, this can have a massive effect, especially as the larger AoE variants of these spells start to come out to massively buff up your large forces of troops. In that same vein, Maws of the Earth or Earth Grip are overlooked but still very powerful spells for you to use. You don't want your troops potentially being hit, and you don't have the best in terms of attack skills. Therefore, immobilizing your enemies is a great way to get around that, though you do have to be a little bit careful of the Maws of the Earth's AoE, because it might kill a few of your own troops. Another great way to stop your troops from taking hits is to make the first successful hit against them miss. Twist Fate and its variants do great work on your numerous but low hit point troops, and can let them last surprisingly long with their defense skills. Once you get a spell like Will of the Fates online with your communions, your troops can fight far above their gold cost. Doom is another spell that should be considered. Cursing any enemy unit with bad luck and bad rolls is a great way to give yourself a leg up in combat, and goes very well with your astral heavy communions. Use this to take the bite out of the enemy units. Curse of Stones is another good battlefield-wide spell. Giving your enemy units additional fatigue each round will be a massive help for your units. Your units generally have fairly high encumbrance, so will normally fatigue out before your opponents. This spell helps you to level the playing field quite a lot, especially if you can also get some fatigue-reducing spells on your side, like Relief. Another good way to improve your soldiers' longevity is through Soldiers of Steel and its respective variants. Most of your troops wear a helmet, armour, and have a shield. Casting the spell on them will massively improve the protection they get from their armour, and especially if they parry, and can make the difference between chip damage and death. In order to improve your troops' ability to do damage, consider using Giant Strength Warriors. The +4 to strength this gives you massively increases your troops' ability to do damage, especially through tougher armour, and it isn't too hard to cast without boosters or communions. This spell can also make slingers not completely useless as well, and turns your Bird Knight's charge attack into a very scary prospect. Speaking of ranged attacks, something like Hail of Burning Embers will turn your ranged firepower to the max. Slingers are now able to do damage despite their low strength for a very cheap gold price, and our crossbowmen and crosswielders are already very reasonably priced for a crossbow, so having some more armor-piercing fire damage will hurt your enemy a lot, though you do have to worry a little bit about friendly fire. No pun intended. Another way to get around your melee troops' low strength is through things like Weapons of Sharpness and its variants, giving your units armor piercing on their slashing and pierce attacks, which, for all but your Baculus units, is a fantastic way for getting around their low strength. For your Baculites, giving them Earth Shatter Hammers is another good way of letting them deal more effectively with enemy Sacreds, letting them have a chance to stun as well as doing fatigue damage to those units. I'll also give a quick shout out to Solar Brilliance, which has a chance to blind all units on the battlefield and can deal 5 armor piercing damage to demons or undead. If you know you're going to be facing up against large numbers of demons or undead, this can be a great way to help clear them out. Your troops already have decently high magic resistance, which can be improved further by anti-magic, so they're less likely to get blinded than some other nations. Okay, moving on from that, what are some good non-national summons? Well, I really rate Clockwork Soldiers and Clockwork Horrors. They give you some nice resistant troops for dealing with enemy mages, and they also have far superior strength in comparison to your regular troops. Horrors are particularly good at clearing through chaff, and they are fairly easy for you to summon while not being too expensive. If you just need the bodies, however, to hold the line for your communions, Clockwork Soldiers and eventually Mechanical Men are probably better. Golems are a great way to use your Astral Gems if you don't want angels. They give you a very useful mindless thug chassis to kit out and aid your armies or do some raiding. You have access to paths that you need to make them useful, things like Frostbrands, Boots of the Messenger, and Vine Shields, thanks to your water and nature randoms. And you still have access to good earth and astral items as well. Give Biggie Gall a chance. Fire Drakes are another good summon for you to use once you have the conjuration to do so. They give you some large AoE fire damage that can sit behind your less important troops or summons to continuously shoot cones of flames at your enemies. Very helpful against nature nations or those that aren't fire resistant. If you do need some evocation bait, Hill Giants aren't a bad shout. You get large stacks of HP with massive amounts of strength that are very useful for taking the heat off your other units, in addition to being fairly effective in sieges for breaking down the opponent's walls. With some buffs, they can actually become fairly tanky as well, but they're too large to share square with one of your normal Piconyes, unfortunately. Other than that, your paths are all just slightly too low for regular path boosting methods without considerable boosting costs. And where you can use them, I'd suggest just sticking to your angels. You'll more than likely have more pearls and other gems in your game, just due to your path levels in it, and your angels are very strong, at least in my mind. When it comes to forging, there are a few items that are useful for you to consider. For your research boosters, you actually honestly struggle as you do not have access to the easier ones to make. Things like quills or imps are not nationally available. You can either make homunculi, which are costly at 10 nature gems a pop, or, at Construction 7, pump out as many lightless lanterns as you can. Until then, use indie mages for research booster production, or just recruit more of your adept researcher sages. For boosters, Earth Boots, Starshine Caps, or Coins of the Meteoric Iron are your usual boosters, and if you can get access to Nature 2, crafting a Thistle Mace into potential Moonvine Bracelet will massively increase your path levels available to you outside of your communions for your Nature Mages. Moving on to some other items, the Summer Sword isn't the best weapon to use in combat, but it does give you plus 150 supply bonus for your troops. And given that each of your troops consume as much as a human, and you can have a lot of them, supplies can become an issue for you, especially if you're fighting in a Death Dominion or provinces with a low population. Giving this to one of your less magically active commanders as well can let them tangle up your foes in vines, a useful strategy to help your troops. The Bag of Endless Wine gives similar benefits at fewer gems and an easier level to forge with, just without the tangled vines. Fire in a Jar is another great item for you to make, letting you have access to temporary fire gems every single battle. This can let your Fire 1 mages cast Phoenix power to make them Fire 2s, much better able to cast things like Fireballs or use additional gems for higher fire spells such as Falling Fires, really good to use with your Earth Fire crosspaths as well, for plenty of magma eruptions in the mid-game. The Helmet of Heroes and Horn of Valor both help give your leaders even more inspirational leadership, which are very important for your large numbers of not-so-brave men. Anything that can help your good leaders lead their men better will reduce the numbers you will lose through routes and fear effects. Sky Metal Matrices and Slave Matrices are useful for your nation, especially when it comes to allowing other paths into your communions. This means that you can use indie mages with paths that you don't normally have access to, things like air, death, or any of your other randoms without astral, into your communions, which will make it more fatiguing to your communion slaves, but can give you access to great battlefield-wide spells in order to cast on your troops. The Banner of the Northern Star is a costly item, but good for when you're fielding large communions. Immediately cutting down on the fatigue of casting Communion Slave and Master for everyone involved is great. and Light of the Northern Star is a high fatigue spell as well. Cutting this out of your script means less fatigue for your communion and more script slots for you to use on your commanders. Finally, the Amulet of Resistance and other fatigue-reducing items like Boots of the Messenger are great for use by your communion slaves, especially when stacked with Summon Earth Power or Relief. If you have the gems to make them, especially if you built a hammer, they're a very effective, cost-efficient way of keeping your communion batteries alive and conscious for longer. Okay, let's move on to Pretender design. Piconye actually has access to a lot of combination of the Christian, Egyptian and Indian culture groups for Pretenders, giving them a fairly large selection of Dominion 4, 3 and 2 Pretenders, although less Rainbow Pretender chassis to choose from in comparison to most nations. When it comes to Awake, Dormant or Imprisoned Pretenders, it really depends on what bless you go for as a nation. Given your sacreds and the fact that you can build more of them than other nations thanks to getting additional sacred recruitment per temple, having a good bless for at least one of your sacreds can really help your expansion and your first couple of wars. Having an Awake expander will also massively improve your ability to expand, which can be a little bit slow given your slow map move on most of your units and your tendency to take higher attrition than other nations, although without bad scales you will have to sacrifice on your bless a little bit. For your scales, Dominion is quite important for Piconye to give you a base level to recruit your sacreds as well as to spread out any of your beneficial scales. In my mind, starting at 6 Dominion is a good level, but you can go higher if you have an immobile pretender or if you want to really rely on early sacred production for more. Order scales are quite nice for you as Piconye. With high order you have the recruitment points to recruit a lot of your smaller troops per turn, and that's especially true for your Bird Knights, which you recruit from any of your forts. You also have a +1 limit by default as Piconye for order, making it harder to dip into turmoil as well. Production is another good scale for Piconye, unless you want to rely on massive numbers of militia and slingers. Your units all require more resources than gold to recruit. Production scales will also help your income as well, which is good in order to get your infrastructure up early for more foreign recruit mage locations. For temperature scales you have a national preference of Heat 1, but no scale limits for temperature. This means that you can go to a minimum or maximum of -2 or +2 for your temperature. If you're willing to take the income hit, you can go cold with not as much immediate effect. The map move of your units is low enough that the lack of snow move doesn't affect you that much. As a counterpoint, you do have many more fire mages and cold mages, so having Heat 2, while it gives you less design points, can be better for doing more fire damage to them. For growth and death scales, it's up to a personal preference and necessity of design points. Growth can be nice for increasing income over the course of the game, though as the game goes on you have to be more careful of battlefield wipe spells deleting your low HP units. If you want to focus on early game power, going death is an option for a harder bless, but the lowered supplies in your provinces will start to hurt your hungry little guys. Have a little test and see which you prefer and how low you want to go. For fortune and misfortune, it's again up to personal preference. You have no fortune tellers to help counter misfortune, so you'll be relying on taking high order in order to lower the chance of events from minor dips into misfortune. On the other hand, you do like fortune for better chances of gem events in the late age, which can be game changers if you get a few of them. But you have no national heroes to get through fortune as well, so your investment may not seem as worth it in comparison to other nations that get game changing heroes. Again, go with what you prefer and what you need to use in order to make your god. For magic and drain, you do like magic scales for one reason. You have difficult creating early research boosters, and you have access to fast researchers that are fairly cheap already. Having some magic scales can make your early research quite fast, especially when you start to get up more of your infrastructure. Conversely, drain is also a potential choice for you. You will start to fall behind a little bit in research, but you already have high magic resistance on your units, making them more resistant to MR negate spells in your dominion. While the extra spellcasting fatigue is never great for your mages, your use of communions will help them to mitigate that in comparison to other mages acting alone. When it comes to blesses, you have a few choice. All but one of your mages are sacred, making a mage bless potential choice for you to make. On top of that, you have 3 different sacreds that you can make as troops, all of which like a different kind of bless. You can try and make a bless to cover everyone, or specialise into a specific unit to get the most out of it. Remember as well that you get 1 additional free bless point to use as Piconye, which is always nice. Let's move on to some example blesses. Weapon blesses aren't the worst idea, as you have sacred crossbowmen, and they will benefit from any weapon bless you give them, as it's not a natural ranged attack. In addition, your Bacillite or soldier priests and sacred mages will also benefit from this as well in combat. Out of these blesses, I really do like Frostmist weapons. It's a little bit of a meme, but having all of your sacred crossbows create clouds of damaging cold can actually do a lot of work against your enemy. If you really want to double down on it, use it in conjunction with something like slowing weapons, to not only break up the enemy formations, as some are slowed and some aren't, but those that are slowed will also stay within the clouds for longer, taking more damage. This is okay for your melee sacreds too, but you do have to be a little bit careful about your own cold clouds. Giving them some cold resistance can go a long way to keeping them alive. Another shout out to Unholy Weapons, which turns both your cross wielders and acolytes into exceptional anti-sacred forces, although it's quite an expensive bless for such a limited application. Given how Fear and Dread work better with more units in a square, taking either is a great way to make your sacreds able to expand better. One square of sacreds will absolutely destroy the morale of any normal indie force that they find themselves fighting up close against, and given your pretty okay sacred production, it can be an effective strategy. Be sure as well to give them some form of layered defense as well, however. If you have the design points for it, luck is another amazing choice for you. It's very expensive and it also requires luck scales, but it does give your low HP sacreds a 75% chance not to take fatal damage, which massively increases their longevity. The only downside is its cost, meaning that you'll have to sacrifice something else in order to get it, but given that you do not natively have access to glamour magic, you have no other way of casting luck on your troops. The combination of Enchanted Blood Undying remains a great combo. It works especially well on lower HP units, as you're making them much tankier with each Undying investment in proportion to other units. Giving your sacreds an additional 10 HP they can dip into combat makes them far tankier. Combining this with Enchanted Blood means that they also heal up after combat, and the extra magic resistance is always nice. Obfuscate is another interesting choice. It will mean that all of your sacred commanders and sacreds, including your angel summons, will be able to become stealthy. This massively increases your options when it comes to raiding provinces, as you will effectively become an elf nation with your sacreds. Having some Hamashas running around stealthily is quite hard for your opponent to deal with without a concerted force in order to counter them. Blood Surge is another nice choice, giving any of your sacreds that kill a living unit +3 attack, strength, and +1 to their defense and reinvigoration. This is nice for your casters that kill. The reinvigoration is always nice. Your crossbows like the reinvigoration, and they will actually do 1 more damage with their crossbow with the strength buff. And giving your sacred frontliners +3 attack after they kill something is amazing. You won't have this going off on your sacreds all the time, just due to their lower initial damage, but it is still a nice pickup. Barkskin or Stygian Flesh are another nice choice. These will both massively improve the protection of your sacred units, and especially your mages. Barkskin does have the negative of the additional fire damage that you take, but it does work against magic weapons, whereas Stygian Flesh gives you more invulnerability, but won't work against magical weapons. Which one to go for is personal preference. Barkskin can be nice in conjunction with your group stone skins later on to make your sacreds even more tanky, though at that point you're then making them vulnerable to 2 different elemental types, a potential death sentence for your low HP sacreds. For a bit of a funnier bless, going max strong vitae and resilience is pretty funny. It makes your sacreds have up to 18 HP, which is actually quite a lot of HP to go through, especially given their stats. It can also make your communions last quite a bit longer, but it's not as flashy as other blesses you could get for 10 bless points. Another funnier bless, but surprisingly effective one is Flight, which may sound like a bit of a meme, and it kinda is, but it's surprisingly effective on your melee sacred troops. The main issue that they have is with their low combat speed, they do actually struggle to close the gap with the enemy. With this bless, they definitely don't. It is kind of wasted on your cross wielders and normal mages, unless you try and thug them out, but it will let you use your sacreds in conjunction with your bird knights for a pretty scary alpha strike, at least until Storm comes online. For blesses to stay away from, I think it's fairly self-evident. Regeneration isn't good for your nation. You don't have the HP to make it worth its cost on any of your sacreds, other than maybe your angels, but that's a long ways down the road, and you can use your nature mages to cast that for them if you really want to. I also really don't like Berserker. You have too many sacred mages that can go off script when they're hurt, which is really damaging for your scripts, your communions, and buffing your troops. Blood Bond may sound nice to keep your sacred alive from attacks by sharing the damage out among them, but one large AoE attack will just wipe out any sacred force in the vicinity, or one of your own gifts of heaven striking your own lines. I did find that out the hard way. Charged bodies can be funny to use in a blitz, but you're more likely to end up with just dead sacreds everywhere every time they take a hit. Fortitude is another not great choice. You don't have the HP to get the use out of this by having any of the incoming damage. It's better to try and not take that damage in the first place if you can help it. Lastly, I've tried larger on this nation. It can be good in that your sacreds have higher HP and strength, but you lose one of your best traits with them, which is your buff and attack density. This will make them be on par with humans in terms of attack density, which they will more unlikely lose against them. It can be nice for your communions for more HP, but I've tried it, I don't really like it, so I don't recommend it. You do you though. That's some talk about blesses. Let's go over some example pretenders. These pretenders are just some of my thoughts from playing the nation, and there's some examples to give your noggin a jogging for pretenders that you could try out. And as always, if you disagree where I put my scales or I put my magic, switch them around a little until you get something you like to play with. Let's start with an Awake Expander Dragon. A basic blue dragon with 7 water and a Frost Mist Weapons Bless, with 6 Dominion, 2 Order, 1 Productivity, 3 Cold, no Growth, 1 Misfortune, and 1 in Magic. This expander is simple. He's here to help you expand in the early game. The combo of Cold 3 with Frost Mist Weapons does a lot for both your dragon and your cross-wielders, though you should be careful of using it on your melee sacreds as you have no cold resistance. While it does nothing for the dragon's Frost Breath attack, all 3 of his other attacks will also summon Cold Clouds, and that in combination with their 10 Fear makes him into a pretty decent expander. They will die alone against Concerted Province Defense, however, at least until you get things like Liquid Body and Quicken Self become available through research. They have okay scales to the nation to let you get a decent number of sacreds out of your cap and continue troop production in your other forts. Next is the Awake Semi-Hellbless Titan, the Chaos Kneater, who has 9 air, 5 death and 4 fire for an attack skill, flight and Stygia of Flesh Bless, with a 7 Dominion, 2 Order, 1 Productivity, 3 in Heat, 3 in Death, 3 Misfortune and 2 in Drain for scales. The idea behind this pretender is that you can help with your research early until you forge him some gear, at which point you can help your armies expand. The combination of flight and Stygian flesh will allow your sacred troops to hit the back line of your opponents, while they'll be mostly safe from reprisal. Combo this with your bird knights for going after the archers, and you should be able to wipe out most indie commanders fairly quickly, securing you the victory in battle. In your first war, this many potential flying units will be exceptionally difficult for your opponent to deal with without research, which is good, because you'll need to be very aggressive with a god like this. Later on in the game, you have access to high death and air from your god, 2 paths you don't otherwise have, as well as enough fire to help boost up your fire mages with things like fire skulls and fire helms. Just try and end the game out before your bad scales come back to bite you. Next, we have the Dormant Protector Titan, the DV of Strength, who has 5 astral and 4 in fire and nature, with a fire resistance, inspirational presence, solar weapon, and poison resistant bless, with 6 Dominion, 2 in Order, Productivity, Heat and Misfortune, and 1 in Magic. The idea behind this bless is it helps your sacred resistances, gives your leaders the ability to lead even more troops and increase their inspirational further, while giving your sacreds a slight damage boost with solar weapons. It's not the best weapons bless, not by a lot, but it does give you another way of doing a little more damage, especially against the undead. When your god awakens, she has one of the better chassis available, having 4 arms to put 4 weapons on with good attack and defense skill on top of her ambidextrous 4 feature, which can make her into a very scary opponent to fight. This is on top of her Sacred Tiger, with 3 innately magical attacks and a fear aura on top of his high 144 hit points. That's the potential for 7 attacks coming from her and her Tiger, 14 if you can get quickness off on her from one of your water randoms. Of course, then you have to worry about fatigue issues, but you can gear up around that. A very scary chassis to contend with on top of being a great leader, get a Fire Shield, Body Ethereal and Barkskin spell on her, and she can go to town in your first war. The next god is a little more all-in on himself, the Dormant Eledonk the Elephant Idol, who has 6 in Earth and Astral and a Reconstruction Hardskin Bless, with 5 Dominion, 2 in Order, Productivity, Heat and Misfortune, and 1 in Drain. This big tanky elephant has one goal, to siege down an enemy capital with your forces. He has great siege strength thanks to his siege strength bonus, and he can do a lot of work on the battlefield. He has very good resistances to both physical and elemental and poison damage, while also being a size 10 trampler. Reconstruction will help him regen in combat, useful as he has 0 defense skill, and it should help with any chip damage received. The Hardskin Bless is useful for both your sacreds and himself, increasing their natural protection by quite a bit. Use him in conjunction with your Inquisitor Priest to remove the enemy dominion near to where you're fighting before sending him out to get the most out of his HP and Bless. Don't be afraid to sit on the enemy capital to remove their dominion as well before going into their cap for a big siege. His trampling on top of his innate spellcaster ability means he can do a lot of work for you in battle. For his scales, they're still pretty decent as well for getting a standing army up around him, though he doesn't really give your sacred troops anything to work with while he's asleep, unfortunately. Next we have the Imprisoned UndyingBlood the Baphomet, with 7 in Astral, 5 in Blood and Fire, and 3 in Death. For his Bless, we have a 5 times Undying, 2 times Strength, Enchanted Blood, and Blood Surge. For his Scales, we have 7 Dominion, 3 Order, 2 Productivity, 2 Heat, 1 Misfortune, and 2 in Magic. This Pretender is simple. He's here to make our normal Sacred troops last longer with Undying and Enchanted Blood, and to make them hit far harder with Blood Surge and Strength of the Flesh. If you wanted to go heavier into the Bless, taking worse Scales for additional Strength of the Flesh is possible to give you +2 damage on your crosswielders when Blood Surged, which shouldn't be underestimated. Your Scales are good for producing a lot of units, and keeping your research high while your god is imprisoned. And when he comes out with his high astral, he can be useful for big astral rituals, and he can also teleport into important battles. With his blood, he can also break you into that as well, though he does come out so late into the game it might not be worth it for you. Depends what's happening at the time. Next, we have an Imprisoned Scales Rainbow, the Arch-Emperor, who has 4 in Astral, 3 in Fire, Air, Earth, and Nature, 2 in Water and Blood, and 1 in Death, with a 3 times Resilient, 3 times Strength of the Flesh, 1 Strong Vitae, and Farcaster Bless. For his Scales, we have 5 Dominion, Order 3, Productivity 2, Heat 2, Growth 1, Fortune 1, and Magic 2. This gives you a good selection of Scales to use for your normal troops, and will help build up your initial infrastructure. Your Bless is mostly mage-centric, with some strength buffs thrown in to help out your Sacred troops. Farcaster is very nice for allowing your mages to throw out their evocations far on your own side of the battle, in addition to making sure that your slow troops are nearly always in range to buff. The HP increases will get your Sacreds beyond 10 hit points, so casting things like group regeneration on them at that point can be quite a good idea. As with all rainbows, you can choose exactly what paths you want to get and what Bless you want to use, but I like this one for its elemental axis and potential to buff up your other mages with boosters. For your Rainbow Chassis, I do think the Arch-Emperor is the best one, especially if you want to get higher in Astral, as he has the lowest cost, 10 additional path costs, and you can't get any path to Dominion 1 chassis as Piconye. Finally, we have the Imprisoned Swole Boys, another Arch-Emperor, who has 5 in Astral, 3 in all other paths. He has 5 Dominion, 3 Order, 2 Production, and Heat for Scales, with a 5 times Strength of the Earth, 5 times Strength of the Flesh, and 1 Undying Bless. This guy is simple. He's here to make your Sacreds hit hard by hitting the gym. He's got good enough Scales, though you could probably make them worse for an even harder Bless. Is this a good use of 20 Bless points? Probably not. But seeing your little guys hit for about 21 damage each, 5 of them to a square, is very funny for me, and it will certainly give your neighbours a bloody nose. Try it out sometime. And with that, that's our national overview for Late Age Piconye. Maybe you can finally lead the little horned men of Piconye to create the virtuous, exalted empire they knew they were always destined to make. Thank you for staying this far. Hopefully you found this video informative. If you like what we do with the channel and you want to support us further, consider becoming a member of the Burger Band for early access to videos as soon as they're uploaded, as well as some additional benefits. Either way, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, take care. They're taking the Piconyes to Isengard. 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 They're taking the Piconyes to Isengard.